Let's talk cameras, the bridge between player input and the player character. A game's camera will affect every other game design decision made throughout development. It must show the player everything they need in order to play. If there is any tension between what the player can see and what the player needs to see in order to make effective decisions, the game is flawed. So let's go over some of the implications of camera design decisions and the choices I've made so far. Hi, I'm BGK of Pear Tree Games, and this is Return of the Lividaea Devlog 1 Camera System. The genre of your game typically influences the camera decisions you'll make. When I started Return of the Lividaea, I knew I wanted to have an isometric camera view. It's the standard for most of the classic tactics games, since it excels at giving the player a good vantage point over the combat area to strategize, while also giving greater visual detail to the scene than a top-down view. But it does have its drawbacks. In terms of an RPG, the distance makes it harder to create a connection between the player and the character. Many games will introduce expressive portraits, voice acting, full cinematic cutscenes, or even change camera perspective outside of combat. This all helps the player feel more intimate with the characters and their story. As a solo dev with no current artistic abilities who wants to someday release this game, I won't really be able to do any of those things. So I've opted for simple body language animations during dialogue to help the characters feel alive and hope that carries through to the player. I haven't implemented that part of the dialogue system yet, so we'll see. If it doesn't work out, I may try other avenues, but I won't sacrifice the gameplay view for the sake of story. Since I wanted the aesthetic to mimic classic RPG pixel art games in voxels, I first started with an orthographic projection. This has some benefits regarding frustum culling and gives a bit of a unique style. But it felt almost boring to look at for extended times and didn't allow me to showcase the height variations of the world, which I started to really like playing with the more I experimented in level design. So I then played around with a very narrow field of view and a perspective projection to achieve a similar but slightly more interesting look. But in the end, I found a wider field of view to feel the most engaging. This does mean more draw calls and lower performance, but after some tweaking, I think the trade-off is acceptable. Currently, the player has control of the camera at all times, but it is limited to rotating 90 degrees horizontally or rotating about 30 degrees vertically to get a bit more of a top-down view. Giving control over the view direction gives the player more agency to explore the world in their own way and encourages them to go down whatever path they want. This was essential to promote the feeling of a small open world rather than a linear game. This, of course, makes it more difficult to ensure the player will find certain plot points or highlight areas or objects that are necessary to continue. With a fixed view camera, you know exactly what the player will see when they enter each scene. But in our case, they could be rotated 180 degrees and miss something that would have been completely obvious otherwise. So it's something that always needs to be considered when designing levels. One of the more difficult challenges with an isometric view and a rotating camera with no scene changes is line of sight. I've opted to only create a dissolve effect for interiors and not every object obstructing the view of the player. I find it becomes annoying when you only have a little window to see your character popping in and out of. I found this very true in Divinity Original Sin 2. But you also don't want to make the window too big, as that can remove parts of the scene that may be needed. I find it's better to see nothing at all and just allow the player to rotate to a new angle than to only see a portion of the surrounding area. Because remember, when a player looks at the screen, they hardly look at their own character. They're trying to see what's around the character and what's in the rest of the scene. Again, this places a lot on the level design since combat requires full view of the combat area, and so all tiles on the grid should be viewable from at least one angle. Regarding the interior dissolve effect, I'll probably go into detail and cover how that works in another video. Tactics games tend to feel a bit stiff in my opinion, and the combat abilities are usually the area games like to give a bit more of a dramatic effect or juice. I would like to maybe implement some camera cuts and tracks to liven up the ability sequences, but you have to be careful to not end up going full Final Fantasy summon and have a 2-minute cinematic every time you use an ability. Fire Emblem and Advance Wars do a cool scene change for each attack to add some flair to the battle, but obviously that's a no-go. But I like the focus on just the participants of the current ability, So one thought I've been mulling is to slightly fade other units in the combat area while an attack happens, and the camera cuts to close-ups, but that may be too weird. It's early days yet, so hard to tell. I'd like to cover input more in depth in another video, but one very interesting side effect of an isometric view is keyboard input. It makes it very odd. Do you assign each direction as a diagonal, or does the player press two directions to move? Maybe W always moves the character forward in local space, with A and D rotating 90 degrees? Or do you remove keyboard as an input and force mouse input? Or do you remove keyboard and mouse input and force controller input? Most games will default to a mouse input. I've currently stayed away from that, so that's for another discussion. If you have any thoughts about input though, I'd love to hear them, so please let me know in the comments. Whatever your game's camera system, remember it should be predictable, and its key purpose is to allow the player to play. Sounds silly, but it's easy to fall in the trap of not seeing what the player sees because you've designed the levels and mechanics and know what lies just outside of view. I want to keep these devlogs short, so I'll end here with asking your thoughts on cameras in tactics games and RPGs. Any standouts or things to avoid? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. And lastly, remember I'm just a hobbyist, so I don't really know what I'm talking about. Just trying to share my thoughts as I make this game, so I don't take too much stock in any of it. Take care.